Drop it.
Drop the knife.
Drop it. Drop
Hey,
it.
Charlie. Drop the knife.
Drop it.
Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Lou, watch out. Drop the knife.
Drop the knife.
Central, we have eyes. Drawing's gone. Hit him here with a knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife.
This document provides a detailed explanation of an officer-involved shooting that occurred in New York City at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, where officers responded to a mental health emergency that resulted in police discharging their firearms. This explanation is based on an NYPD briefing that includes video footage, audio recordings, and evidence collected during the initial investigation. Understanding police use of force. Both New York state law and NYPD policy authorize police officers to use reasonable force when circumstances require it. Officers can use force to protect themselves, protect others, or take someone into custody when that person poses a threat. However, the force used must be reasonable and appropriate for the situation. When an officer fires their weapon or when there's a serious injury or death involving police, the NYPD's Force Investigation Division conducts a thorough investigation. These investigations often take a year or longer to complete. Investigators interview multiple witnesses several times, review many hours of video footage, and analyze forensic evidence including ballistics, medical reports, and crime scene data. What we know about an incident can change as the investigation progresses. Initial information might be incomplete, and as more evidence is gathered and analyzed, the understanding of what happened can evolve. The emergency call. The incident began with a 911 call from Brooklyn Methodist Hospital.
New York City, 911, they need the police, fire, medical.
Hi, I'm calling from Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. I have a patient who's suicidal. He's actually hurting himself right now. I need police here.
The patient was on the 8th floor in the neurology unit, room 8067. This wasn't in the emergency room, but in a patient care unit higher up in the building. Hospital security was already at the scene trying to manage the situation, but they needed additional help because the patient was becoming increasingly difficult to control. During the call, the 911 operator asked if there were any weapons involved, which is standard protocol for officer safety. The hospital staff confirmed the patient had a knife. This immediately elevated the seriousness of the situation. What started as a mental health crisis now involved an armed individual who was demonstrating he was willing to harm himself and possibly others. The caller also indicated they couldn't fully assess the status of everyone in the room because the situation was chaotic and dangerous. Security guards were trying to contain the patient, but with a knife involved, the risk to everyone present was significant. Police response and arrival. Multiple police units were dispatched to the hospital. When officers arrived at the 8th floor, they encountered a tense and dangerous situation. The patient, experiencing what police call an EDP, emotionally disturbed person, was armed with a knife and not cooperating. From the moment officers arrived, their focus was on getting the individual to drop the knife. Officers repeatedly commanded, "Drop the knife," and put it down dozens of times. This repetition served multiple purposes. It clearly communicated what the person needed to do, gave multiple opportunities to comply, and documented that officers gave clear commands before using force. The standoff. The situation developed into a barricade situation. The patient was confined to a hospital room but refused to surrender the knife despite continuous commands from officers. Officers positioned themselves outside the room, maintaining a safe distance while preventing the individual from leaving where he could potentially harm hospital staff, patients, or visitors. During the standoff, officers demonstrated significant restraint. They didn't immediately use force but spent considerable time trying to verbally persuade the individual to comply. Officers asked his name, tried to establish dialogue, and explained they were there to help. One officer said, "We're trying to help you. All right, drop the knife." Officers showed concern for others who might be in danger, asking if anyone else was inside the room with the patient. They worried about security guards or hospital staff who might be trapped. They worked to evacuate people from the floor, telling everyone to get off the floor and leave the area to ensure civilians weren't in potential danger. Some officers asked if anyone had a taser, showing they were looking for less lethal options. A taser would allow them to incapacitate the individual without using deadly force. This demonstrates they were actively trying to find alternatives to shooting. Attempts at communication. Officers made genuine attempts to communicate with the individual and understand his situation. They asked, "What's your name? And why won't you drop the knife? And what's going on?" These weren't just tactical questions. They were attempts to establish a human connection and understand what was happening in the person's mind. One officer tried reasoning with him. "You know the deal, man. You just got to drop it, and you got to drop it so we can take care of everything." This approach shows officers understood they were dealing with someone in mental health crisis, not just a criminal suspect. They were trying to help him understand that dropping the knife was the path to getting the help he needed. Officers also tried to reassure him. However, despite these efforts, the individual continued to hold the knife and did not comply with commands. Escalation of the situation. At one point during the incident, an officer fired a shot. The call went out over the radio. Shots fired. 1 shots fired. This first shot did not end the encounter. The individual apparently still had the knife, and officers continued commanding him to drop it. The situation remained tense with the armed individual still not complying. Officers had to make split-second decisions about protecting themselves, protecting others in the hospital, and trying to resolve the situation safely. They were dealing with someone in a mental health crisis, armed with a weapon in a hospital full of vulnerable people. Eventually, officers fired additional shots. The exact sequence of events and the reasons for each shot will be thoroughly investigated by the Force Investigation Division. These are the critical moments that will receive the most scrutiny during the investigation. Emergency Services Unit Call. During the incident, there was discussion about calling in the Emergency Services Unit, ESU, the NYPD's tactical team specially trained for situations like this. Someone can be heard saying, "Rush ESU Central," indicating they wanted this specialized unit to respond. The ESU would have had access to more equipment and tactics for dealing with barricaded armed subjects, including shields and specialized less lethal weapons. However, these units take time to arrive, and officers on scene had to manage the immediate threat with available resources. The aftermath. After shots were fired, officers worked to secure the scene and ensure everyone's safety. They checked on whether anyone else was injured and began securing the scene for investigation. The chaotic audio reflects the high-stress nature of the incident, with officers calling out to each other and coordinating their positions. The investigation process. Following the shooting, the NYPD Force Investigation Division, working with the prosecutor's office, launched a comprehensive investigation that will continue for weeks or months, possibly over a year. Investigators will conduct numerous interviews with all the officers involved, hospital staff, members who witnessed the event, security guards on scene, and any other witnesses. These witnesses will likely be interviewed multiple times as investigators work to establish exactly what happened and why. Forensic analysis will include ballistics testing to determine which shots were fired by which officers, medical examiner reports if there was a fatality, analysis of the knife and other physical evidence, and review of all available video footage from body cameras and hospital security cameras. The investigation will attempt to answer critical questions. Was the force used justified? Did officers have reasonable alternatives? Did they follow proper procedures and training? Were there any policy violations? The review board process. Once the investigation is complete, all evidence and findings will be presented to the first Deputy Commissioner's Use of Force Review Board. This board evaluates whether the force used was justified and within department policy. The review board will examine everything: the initial 911 call, the officer's response, the commands given, the attempts at de-escalation, the decision to use force, and the amount of force used. They'll compare the officer's actions against department policy, training, and legal standards. This review process ensures accountability and transparency. It helps the department identify if policies need updating, if additional training is needed, or if disciplinary action is warranted. Understanding the complexity. This incident highlights the complexity and danger of responding to mental health crises when weapons are involved. Officers were called to help someone in crisis, but that person was armed and potentially dangerous to himself and others. They had to balance their desire to help with their need to protect themselves and others. Mental health calls are among the most challenging situations police officers face. They require patience, communication skills, and often specialized training. At the same time, when a weapon is involved, the situation can turn deadly in seconds. Officers must make quick decisions with incomplete information in high-stress situations. The hospital setting added another layer of complexity. Hospitals are full of vulnerable people. Sick patients, elderly individuals, children, people who can't move quickly or defend themselves. Officers had to consider all these factors while managing an armed individual in crisis. The broader context of mental health and policing. This incident occurs within a larger conversation about mental health crisis response and policing. Police departments nationwide are grappling with how to best respond to mental health emergencies, which have increased significantly in recent years as awareness has grown and other support systems have faced constraints. Many departments now implement crisis intervention team training, which teaches officers to recognize mental health crises, de-escalate situations involving emotionally disturbed persons, and connect individuals with resources. Some cities have started programs where mental health professionals respond alongside or instead of police to certain calls. However, when someone in crisis is armed, the situation becomes exponentially more dangerous. Even the most well-trained crisis specialist cannot safely approach someone actively wielding a knife. This creates a difficult dynamic where the person most needs help, but the immediate priority must be disarming them to ensure everyone's safety. Public safety and transparency. The NYPD's decision to release this briefing reflects a commitment to transparency. Making this information public serves several purposes. It allows the public to understand what officers face, enables accountability through community review, and builds trust by demonstrating openness to oversight. Conclusion. This incident represents a tragedy on multiple levels. Someone experiencing a mental health crisis ended up in a confrontation with police that resulted in shots being fired. The situation was difficult, dangerous, and traumatic for everyone involved. The individual in crisis, the officers who responded, the hospital staff trying to help, and any witnesses. The thorough investigation that follows will help determine whether the officers' actions were justified and appropriate. It will also hopefully identify lessons that can be learned to better handle similar situations in the future, potentially including better mental health crisis response protocols, additional equipment or training for officers, or improved coordination between hospitals and police. What's clear from the audio and the briefing is that this was a complex, dynamic situation where officers faced real danger while trying to help someone in crisis. Officers spent significant time attempting to communicate with the individual, seeking less lethal options, and trying to de-escalate before resorting to firearms. The investigation will examine every decision made during those critical moments to determine whether different tactics could have been employed and whether department policies were followed. This process is essential for accountability and for continually improving how law enforcement responds to mental health crises.